What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and next time that the PvE updates in League of Legends, you're going to see a bunch of changes, largely about supports and the item Radiant Virtue, which are all things that I've been working on over the last week and a half or so. And I am, to be honest, a bit less confident in all of these changes and the health of the game than I was with the 13.2/13.1 micro patch AD carry stuff. This is a difficult space, in my opinion, and it's really hard to get a read on what's going on. So let me give you context on how patches work here compared to when you get them and what we're reacting to. So in general, I think the solo queue meta is reasonably healthy. Looking at all ranks across 13.1 ranked games, it's about 2-to-1 range to melee support. And I think that's fine. I think that is a reasonable ratio. I think if it was more skewed than that, I think we'd have kind of a problem. But I don't think the solo queue meta for most players is in a bad spot. And I wouldn't go for very large changes for solo queue reasons. But there are support changes coming into 13.3 because of pro play. Pro play's meta is much more skewed. So here is only the top 4 leagues, so LCS, LEC, LCK, and LPL across 13.1. Here are the things that they have been playing, picking and banning across 13.1. And you can see a lot of these have been nerfed. Now, of course, Ashe is a really big one. Of course, the fact that she's a flex pick into AD carry certainly matters. Karma, her presence in actually just support is more like 24%. Lulu's at 30, Lux is at 12. And realistically, if our metagame is like Karma, Lulu, Lux at 30%, there's a lot of room for other stuff out there, right? If we think Heimerdinger drops off the planet, if Nami drops off the planet because she and Lucia got nerfed, if Yumi drops off the planet because Yumi got nerfed, and Ashe is the only one remaining at high presence, I think we're actually in a pretty good spot for the pro meta. Because I think Ashe, as a support, is probably countered very hard by number 8 in Nautilus. But the problem is I don't know for sure. This is the tough thing, right? I've been working on this patch for the last week and a half, and we just got this patch to hit solo queue 2 days ago, right? I'm recording this on Saturday afternoon. The micro patch hit everyone on Thursday morning, so it's been 24 plus, it's been about 30 hours that the patch has been live. And I spot checked Masters Plus solo queue pick rates, and unsurprisingly, Yumi, Nami, Heimerdinger all went down in pick rate. But like, Ashe is still up there, Karma's still up there, Lulu's still up there, Lux still up there, even for like Masters Plus solo queue. And it's like, are we still just going to be in an enchanter meta? Because what I want is to have a healthy meta in pro play. 50-50 is fine. If it's 70-30 tanks, that's also fine. But what I don't want is 70-30 enchanters. I think that is a boring viewing experience. From what I've heard from players themselves, it's not very fun down there either. And I've heard that basically the current pick and ban metagame is just do whatever you can to get early wave pressure. And no one does that better than enchanters. Unnerfed Yumi actually trades well against enchanters. Ashe, Nami, Heimerdinger, Karma, Lulu, Lux. Like, guess what? All those characters have really good wave pressure. And so, you know, what are the odds that we're actually just going to head into a 100% Ashe, 100% Karma, 100% Lulu, because Ashe gets banned every game, presence, champ select, right? That would be really, really boring, and I don't want to be in that world. But I don't know for sure if I need to nerf Karma, if I need to nerf Lulu, if I need to nerf Ashe. I don't know if I need to do that. And this is the tough part, because I don't know, and because pros aren't playing in the micro patch yet, from what I can tell. Master Plus solo queue is, but they're still playing largely Karma. I don't know how hard we really have to swing. I've got some more time to react to solo queue data. We've got some more time for gut checking, but ultimately, what I'm trying to do in 13.3, like before in 13.2, right, with the AD carry stuff, it was, hey, increase AD carry satisfaction. I don't think the role is weak, but I'm comfortable with some level of power going into the role, but largely I want it to be fun, and I think I hit that pretty well so far from what I've observed. Certainly there's players who are coming out there and being like, XD, Phreak, you're buffing AD carries, look at this Ashe Caitlyn bottom lane. But keep in mind, I didn't buff AD carries. I buffed Infinity Edge, and I buffed Bloodthirster. Guess what Caitlyn's support isn't buying? Infinity Edge or Bloodthirster. The mana regen per level stuff doesn't matter anyway, because Spectral Sickle has absurd amounts of mana regen regardless, and she's not going to run out, so who cares? Largely speaking, my changes didn't affect support Ashe, support Jhin, and so on and so forth, and pretty much anyway. Support Jhin a little bit because W rank up got nicer, but like, for the most part, none of my stuff changed how support AD carries worked because I buffed their crit items. And if you see someone on the internet talking smack about how I buffed all AD carries, knock that off. They're not buying that stuff. It's actually why I systemically buffed items, because they hit the farming AD carries who buy crit. Anyway, I'm here talking about, hey, how can we affect 13.3 supports? So what I went to go do is basically buff a bunch of on the cusp or underperforming supports. And I tried to keep an eye towards solo queue because I don't really want to break down the solo queue. I think it's fine. There's room for some movement, but I really, really don't want to break solo queue. And I'm trying to pull the right amount of punches, buff champions in ways that are going to be acceptable, while also giving pro players a lot of tools to say, look, some of these have to work as Ashe counters. Some of these have to work as Ashe counters. Please tell me some of these are going to work as counters into Ashe support, into Lulu support, things like that. So hopefully that's what we hit. It's a bunch of direct buffs, and hopefully in cool ways. Let's get into the changes that I'm hoping to ship as going to PvE soon in patch 13.3. Quick TLDR, there's, in my mind, about 6 classes in the game. There are lane bullies who are durable. This is champions like Karma, and in the current tuning, Lulu and Nami, where they have lane pressure. Also, they're hard to all in because they have on-demand healing, on-demand shielding, makes it look pretty good. There's ranged bullies who are squishy, and this makes them all-inable. So we could look at champions like Zyra or even Ashe, Jhin support, where ranged auto attacks are very, very powerful, and there should be tension on whether or not you can be all-in in the laning phase. And theoretically, a Nautilus Leona meta should almost invalidate these champions because they'll just get killed by a Nautilus hook. There's Leona, Nautilus, 80% of Alistar kind of Thresh, where it's just like, I'm an engaged tank, I'm here to start out fights. I won't solo kill you, but I will do a lot of damage and I will lock you down so that the rest of my team will do that. This is meant to be the natural, or one of the natural safety valves if it's like, oh, we're just in a turbo push meta forever, but there's only really one Karma out there who's natively really tanky at level 1 and has a fat shield. It's like, well, if it's not Karma, we can lock down Lulu, we can lock down Lux, we can lock down Yuumi, we can lock down Seraphine, and we're not in a Seraphine meta, right? Like, Seraphine and Sona are actually quite squishy. There's hard assassins like Pyke and Pantheon, where they actually might solo kill you, but they're much more reliably going to just actually end your life in the landing phase. There's defensive tanks like Wardens. This is Braum is the prime example. 20% of Alistar's kit is this way because his engage range is much lower than that of Leona and Nautilus. There's a little bit of Rel living here because Rel's engage range is not as good as Leona and Nautilus, so kind of like Alistar. She can't start all the team fights, but she can certainly CC the hell out of either following up off of your team doing stuff, or counter-engaging if you engage into her and she's on the defensive side. And there's also just hard scalers. And in general, I think hard scalers tend to perform really, really well into the other roles right above them right here, where, like, yeah, Kate Lux is going to shove the lane in a lot, but, like, Yumi's kind of chilling, just trying to get out of the lane phase without dying. And it's like, Yumi can't keep Pyke from killing her bottom laner, but she can sustain that, you know, Ashe or whatever against Karma poke as they both scale into the mid game. So there's meant to be some level of counters along here where the more defensive your melee is, the better you are into more aggressive melees, because you can just kind of tank the engage and then out tank and then out trade them. There's meant to be a good cycle here, but right now we're really only seeing these 3 roles. And so it seems to me that the rock, paper, scissors valves of, hey, the engaged tanks can do stuff, isn't hitting the mark. My leading theory here is that it was, even though I liked the durability update, I think it was good for the game. There are some classes that kind of felt the hurt. Mages are, I think in some cases, running out of mana or unable to play a burst sort of profile against tankier champions. Of course, new Seraphs hurts champions like Veigar. Buff Rod of Ages hurts champions like Veigar. If you could run out of mana, the fact that Darius can survive a full rotation with 15% health left, that's going to hurt a lot of burst mages, right? So there's some knock-on effects there. And also, if the tension of melee versus ranged support was, but I can kill you in an all-in, and that all-in isn't valuable anymore, then you aren't viable, right? And to take this one step further, think about the combat pattern of, like, from level 1 to the first recall of bot lane. Like, how does Karma versus Nautilus work? And taking a very broad brush at this, Karma has to deal about 2,000 damage to Nautilus before he dies, because he's got health regen. So he's going to land a Q, he's going to take some damage, he's going to auto him when he goes for CS, he's going to take some damage, he's going to shield some of that, but that's still, you're putting damage towards the Nautilus. And eventually you wear him down, eventually you get him down to half HP, and now he suddenly can't all-in anymore, right? And get him to half HP is functionally just like deal DPS equal to his health regen, and then deal half his health bar. And now he's unable to all-in, right? Whereas, and that's going to be 2,000 damage over the course of a very long laning phase, roughly. The numbers are about there. Whereas think about Nautilus versus Karma. Nautilus starts the all-in, and you either do all of Ash's health bar or you don't. Now, Ash's regen is actually quite low. Karma's regen is okay. She doesn't have any self-healing. But essentially, the amount of actual damage dealt to end Karma's laning phase as Nautilus is like about 1,000. You do all in number 1. They chug their potion or 2 potions. You do all in number 2, and they die. Well, that 1,000 became 1,070 because they gained 70 health. And then as we go to level 3 and level 4 and level 5, as they gain more, that 1,000 is 1,100. Is 1,200, is 1,300. But Karma had to do 2,000 damage to kill. Now, she had a lot of target access, right? She's ranged, she throws Qs, she throws auto attacks, but that 2,000 became 2,070. So Karma's lane bully didn't get hit very, very, very much, right? It got hit by like 5%, whereas Nautilus's lane bully got hit by like 10%, because of the way those champions interact. And so I think disproportionately, the durability update hurt all-in supports in lane. And so through some degree of giving them better all-in tools, letting them live in a world where it takes 2 or 3 all-ins to get the kill, or just withstanding the Karma poke, are some of the tactics I looked at, and I tried to, in my mind, buff champions in ways that I think they should be buffed. This is not necessarily the last change list. I am okay with this change list, but I think there are a lot of ways we could go with this, and I am not 100% sure the way that we actually should go here. I welcome your feedback on this one, especially if you are a like challenger level player, if you're playing in ERLs or like challenger leagues or LCS or LEC, or you're coaching or analyzing there. I really want to know your thoughts. I really want to know what you think it'll take to get us back to a tank meta, or at least like have tanks be common in pro play, because full enchanter, full sellout for laning phase, I think is a pretty boring metagame in pro play. Let's go to the changes themselves. So first up is a buff to Alistar. Alistar, I'm basically not increasing his actual damage. I am with several of these characters trying a version where they aren't getting more damage. They're simply allowed to thrive in a world where they're getting attacked. So Alistar's getting substantially increased self-healing. This now gives him best in class by far self-sustain. His baseline health regen is already very, very good, but this Triumph for Ore buff is a really, really big deal. And I want to point out this healing is every 7 minions. So if you consider this basically popping every wave, aka twice a minute, this is 46 health per minute. That is less than anyone's baseline health regen, because most tank supports regen 8 health per 5, which is like around 100 health a minute. But hey, if we're buffing 46 by 40%, we're at like 60 or so. This is functionally like an extra. It's meaningful. That's all I'm going to say, right? This is a meaningful amount of extra health regen. I am taking away from his ally heal. I do think a world where someone can get poked out of the lane matters. TLDR is in a 2 target heal. He heals himself. He heals his AD carry. The total healing is relatively flat here. It's about the same amount of total healing, but shifting it toward Alistar from his AD carry is probably going to feel better for Alistar himself, because he's the one taking a lot of the poke when he has to walk up and last hit a cannon minion, walk up last hit a melee minion, and Karma throws Q at him, and Sivir throws Q at him, whatever else happens. He can feel it better about it. He still has some of the best sustain on his teammate in the game. It's still going to be a lot of extra regen. He's still going to have that as a core strength, healing up his team, virtually every killer assist in a team fight. That's also going to be there as well, but he's going to do better at this. And then overall, alleviating his mana costs. His actual mana pool and regen are fine, but his mana pool can certainly, or his mana cost can go lower. 5 mana off of Q, 15 mana off of W, and functionally 0 mana off of E. This isn't really going to matter because you max E last, but it's there. But anyway, his all-ins are going to take 20 less mana That's a pretty big deal considering that his all-ins cost almost half his mana bar at level 1. Lowering that pretty substantially should matter quite a bit. Alistar functionally gets more tries to all-in. He's going to have more health regen. He's going to have more mana to spend. He gets more tries to all-in you. Now, his damage is going up to some degree. Keep in mind that Alistar is going to have some AP through Relic Shield. It's not going to be a lot, but 0.2 AP here, 0.2 AP here, 0.3 AP here is still a pretty solid amount. If he has 10 ability power, it's 7 more damage on an all-in. Is 7 damage a ton? No, but it's a number. It matters. And the reason the AP ratio is getting buffed at all is really not because, this is my clever way of giving Alistar 7 more damage, though it does do that and is a meaningful contribution to what's going to go on with this champion. But it's largely the fact that allowing a tank who gets ahead to choose to build offensive items is, I think, a good thing for League of Legends. Alistar's ratios are very, very cut down. There's never a world where an AP item can make sense in the champion, and it still might not make sense, but I think allowing a player who's ahead to have the option of choosing AP, even if it's still not mathematically the best build, at least making it viable, remotely out there, I think is a reasonable choice. And so I'm just kind of making good on him having real AP ratios. Now, there's still some fright over the fact that he still has a 1.6 point and click AP ratio of just WQ, Lichbane auto walk away. There is a chance that AP Alistar is going to be a solo lane threat, and we have to nerf this. That is possible. I hope not. I hope it doesn't break the game, but we're going to try stuff out. I'm buffing Braum. I don't really think Braum Ultra needs buffs. That said, his win rate in solo queue is very, very poor, but Braum is currently already used in pro play as a reaction to things like Nautilus. This is generally how the class is going to work. A Warden is going to be good into an Assassin or a Vanguard, and so that's going to remain true. What I'm buffing Braum for is flattening his matchups against ranged. I don't think Braum is good in a Lux or Karma meta. He still won't be good in a Lux or Karma meta, but Braum is a pretty inoffensive champion, and I think deserves to be able to at least exist. If you're a Braum player, you're allowed to exist if the world is an enchanter meta around you. You're not going to counter them. You're still going to be weak, but let him thrive a little bit more seems reasonable to do. And this is generally going to be pretty low impact in his melee matchups. Braum Nautilus is not going to feel these changes very, very much because he auto wins the health bar trade anyway. He's not getting poked down anyway. And then this stuff is just kind of nice buffs that are pretty matchup ambivalent, and it's not going to change much of the outcome, but letting him thrive a little bit more in a Karma Lux meta, I think is nice for him. So base health regen gets him from pretty standard melee health regen to best in the game health regen. He is tied with Darius and Vi at 10 here. Alistar is still higher via his own passive, but this is a lot of health regen. Bumping him to 640 health puts him at bang on average for a melee champion. To me, Braum's literal job is I take damage for my team. He deserves to have at least average health and best in the game health regen, at least via base stat perspective. This feels pretty reasonable. Of course, he can still pop E if he needs to go walk up and last at a cannon minion. Of course, he can use the health regen of the base health pool to help with this as well. So I think this is kind of reasonable. As far as this change, I think it's good. I just think it's good for the game overall. Level 6, 11, and 16 are the very obvious, these are the power spikes. This is when my ult is learned or ult is ranked up. These target immunity timers are really invisible. You probably ask most players, they would never have told you these target immunities even changed, but let alone tell you when these changes actually happened. And so I think it's just wise to line them up with ultimates because at least they are obvious breakpoints that players can appreciate and take a look at. I think that's generally a good thing. And then just Winter's Bite cooldown going down by 2 seconds at early ranks just gives him more options to look for, either poking back against ranged champions or just in general a little bit more DPS in some of the early trades and whatnot. I don't think it's going to be huge changes. It's not going to be a huge win rate bump, but it will certainly help him in the ranged matchups. Not that I expect him to really be there in that kind of metagame. I am buffing Nautilus, and the thing is, I don't really think Nautilus needs buffs. I just think he needs to spearhead the change of the metagame into an aggressive meta. Nautilus is the current most played melee support on the patch. Nautilus is currently elite skewed and is a much more common, it is basically the most common champion in elite play right now. Looking at the last 2 days of Master Plus solo queue, Nautilus is the overall number 5 support pick, behind Karma, Ashe, Nami, Lulu. I think there's some level of Nami might just fall down over time and whatnot, but Nautilus is already the most played melee. I just kind of want him to lead the spear. He's already played in pro to some degree. He's elite skewed as far as performance is concerned. I'm like, yep, we're not going to fix that right now. you're going to lead the way. And the thing is, there's champions like Leona and Braum who are good into Nautilus. We already, in fact, see Braum as a Nautilus answer once in a while. Leona has historically done pretty well there overall. Thresh can often do pretty well, as you can kind of flay out of the hook and feel kind of good about that lane as well. There's a lot there that's going to kind of happen naturally if Nautilus leads the charge, and so I'm going to let Nautilus lead the charge. If Nautilus is 90% pro presence for a couple of patches, I think that is okay for the game in the short term. I think long term, I want to make sure Nautilus is balanced. I want to make sure that we have an interesting, healthy give and take metagame in pro play and in solo queue. Solo queue is much less counter picky than pro play is, but pro play again is just like full enchanters. And I'm okay if Nautilus is the one who breaks the cycle and the ecosystem revolves around him for the next month until pros kind of figure everything out and we can move on from there and I can nerf Nautilus back down. But yes, Nautilus is going to lead the charge. A 6 flat damage out of the passive is just simply to not make this thing do only 8 damage. Much like Alistar's full combo did 7 more damage in a 10 AP all-in, this button is going to deal 6 more damage itself. Is that a huge amount? No, it's really not, but it certainly is going to look like a buff, and that's fine. Titan's Wrath mana cost and shield value getting better by 20 mana cost and a flat 10 on the shield is, again, giving these sort of regen tools that I think tanks need where, right, the people who are getting all-in got a substantial increase in all-in durability. The champions who were getting poked were not getting a substantial increase in their anti-poke tools. I think making him rely on casting W at the right time does actually elite skew him a very little bit. But I didn't want to just like hard creep health regen on these champions because I'm not convinced that is a good place to go for aggressive tanks. I think it's fine if they trade abilities out for this and they get a power window, given away as W's back on cooldown, whatever, but they don't while doing it. I think it should be very hard for a Vanguard to themselves via the fact that, okay, they can cast spells to wave clear. Nautilus W and E can both do that. Leona W and E can do that. Alistar Q and E can do that. But like, they should be given some room to do that. Their items don't have mana regen on them. I think there's a room for a lot of loosening up here. This is maybe a much larger project and going to be punted down the line, but in general, reasonable to do so. But anyway, allowed to last hit, allowed to do a bit more damage. And what they want to bring up, actually, is the chance of E-max Nautilus. So right now, his most common build is Q-max into W-max. If you did Q-max into E, you're about 1% win rate lower than Q into W. And I'm like, hey, you know what? Why not? Because it's fun. Why not allow Q into E to be a thing? Why not give him that room to choose skill order? And I think it's generally a positive for the game to let players get some extra skill expression, a bit of self-expression of, I want to be tankier, I want to do more damage. So, W's shield can be good, E's damage can be good. Let's go give another 5 points of damage per rank up. Worth noting that, again, Nautilus, gaining 0.2 AP ratio on the E, and the E can multi-hit, which means it could be a 0.4 AP ratio on the all-in, means a 10 ability power Nautilus does 2 to 4 more damage, plus 6 more damage. Is it a huge number? No, it is not huge. Not expected to be huge, but again, a world out there where maybe your Nautilus support got a couple of kills early on, decides, you know what, screw it, we're going Demonic Embrace second, I'm going to carry these noobs. And I think that's fine. I know I'm taking Nautilus. I'm talking about Demonic Embrace a lot because it's right now the only AP Bruiser item in the game. I would like to fix that at some point long term. There are some candidates out there. We'll see. But end of the day, again, I would like AP to not be a trap on these champions. And it's still not going to be great. I'm taking a pretty reserved line here of how much of his AP ratios are really getting buffed. But nudging in a solid direction, I think, is a good thing. I am worried about Nautilus top for pro play. That'll make that lane very boring. And I'm worried about Nautilus jungle being a thing in solo queue because that is 0 counterplay jungle interaction, and that's not fun either. So for overall game health, Nautilus probably should remain a support primary, but I wouldn't mind him getting the occasional look elsewhere just for spice of life, especially if he's doing a non-tanky AP build that requires probably some decent work on his AP ratios being good, but yeah, a world where he builds Night Harvester, Demonic Embrace is maybe interesting. Anyway, it's a thought. Regardless, the last thing I want to bring up is the fact that Emax First has enough sample to maybe actually be a compelling build on Nautilus. Now, with Emax getting better, there's a real world we actually do see Emax First Nautilus in solo queue and pro play in support. I don't necessarily mind that. I think it's a pretty cool ability, has a lot of coverage. Him being a decent damage option, like him actually dealing a meaningful amount of damage, is probably okay, actually, especially if he's giving up his mobility by not maxing Q and giving up his durability by not maxing W. There's a world where that's actually kind of interesting, so for now, I'm okay with this, seeing what happens. And again, Nautilus is kind of going to be leading the whole, there's tank supports now, go for it, kind of push, and then things can kind of come up around him. In case that's not good enough, I am buffing some of the assassins in the support role to really, really, really prey upon non-shielding squishy support champions. There's champions like Sona and Seraphine who are very squishy early game, do not have very good anti-dive tools, do not have very good clutch defensive tools, do not have any hard CC, and should generally just fold to hyper-aggressive melees if they can land the skill shots or find the way in. Champions like Pantheon and, spoilers, Pyke should be preying upon this kind of metagame. We already see some Nautilus into Ashe as a prime counterpick, a little bit of Nautilus into Yuumi has been spotted as well, but I think Pantheon and Pyke should live in a prime spot where if you're blind picking Ashe, I should be able to kill you because Ashe should not have the tools to deal with them. And so these guys are getting buffed. Now, Pantheon, I'm being a bit opportunistic here in choosing the what I want in the change list because I could go for flat damage on WE, maybe Q, and just say, yep, your all is going to be even better. But I'm trying to pick ones that will also do a light buff in jungle, a solid buff in top lane, and hopefully not an outsized buff in mid lane. So Pantheon's mid lane winner is actually quite good. There's also some risk that Pantheon really, really likes new Eclipse and new Black Cleaver and might already be too good in those lanes and not actually have room to buff. It's possible it's true. We have to pull these changes because he's going to be too good in mid lane. But what's interesting is Pantheon's mid lane matchups, his best matchups are every single one of the popular mid laners. Like if you go look at matchup tables for him, it's just like common matchups, winning, 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 losing. And it's like, oh, okay, well, turns out he's just good into Zed and Katarina and Yasuo and all these champions where it's like, yeah, I just want to like stun melee Q auto you. And that's just like, okay, it's auto then melee Q, but you know what my point, right? It's just like, turns out he's really good into all of those kits and he's weak into mages. So Pantheon is not going to be a pro play problem because pro play is purely mages. He is specifically elevated in solo queue because he's good into the current solo queue mid lane metagame. Interesting point, but it is true. It's what's going on here with him. But okay, if we can give an outsized benefit to top lane where he has to trade Qs with Renekton, an outsized benefit to bot lane where maybe he can throw enough Q pokes to get Ashe support low and then do the flash all in, that's probably fine as well. So small base attack speed buff is about 2% more attack speed. It's not a big deal, but it just kind of puts him to like the next breakpoint. 4658 is a pretty standard attack speed breakpoint for champions, and it gives him some melee versus melee power in top lane. It gives him some melee in the jungle power in the jungle, but again, I want him to be sub 50 in the jungle. Mana cost on the spear down by 5, lets him spam it. Cooldown on the spear down by 2 to 1. Lets him spam it a bit more and have a little bit more to say in ranged matchups where he's got to poke someone down or spam to trade against people who are drain taking him in the top lane. But yeah, I'm hoping this is going to be enough that Pantheon will look good as a viable very squishy support in the bottom lane. Next up is Pyke getting a fairly similar set of changes where I am going purely for how much damage he can deal. Right, it's not how much crowd control he has. It's not his durability. It's he's going to output more damage as a champion. Pyke and Pantheon, I think, need to live in a more distinct world than Leona and Nautilus and Alistar and co. I want to push their damage. And yeah, keep in mind that though champions gained a good like 12% or so more health at level 1, they gain even more than that in mid to late game, where the armor scaling is kicking in, the increased health per level is kicking in, and ultimately Pyke is going to have a really hard time, and has had a really hard time doing his job in the mid game. This does have some level 1 ramifications, right? If you have 10 AD at level 1, this is 4 more damage on every single Q. That is some increased damage. At level 8, you're getting 10 more damage on E. Level 10, you're getting 20 more damage. At level 12, you're getting 30 more damage. At level 13, you're getting 40 more damage. Plus, as your AD ratio keeps kicking in on your Q, that'll go up as well. So it's trying to keep Pyke's actual damage output relevant. He is a bit of a ban rate threat in solo queue. He's actually already currently relatively popular, even a Masters Plus solo queue himself as well. So he's reasonably performant. But again, if we can lead the charge where Pyke hard counters Ashe support, I think it's generally speaking a good thing for the game to keep that cycle kind of moving and make him feel viable enough he's going to feel good in those matchups. Rakan is opportunistic. I don't expect Rakan to lead the charge in pro play, but buffing him I think is generally a positive. And this is just like, hey, I'm in the space of looking at these melee support picks. Is the room to improve things? And honestly, Rakan Q feels really bad. It's not worth ranking up, but giving Rakan the option to max Q versus maxing E is a cool thing. And so I heavily increase the rank up incentive on Q by giving it 10 more damage per rank. I don't think we're going to see Q max first most likely, but hey, if we do, that's probably okay. But Q is certainly a pretty interesting skill for him, so why not give that a rank up incentive? The heal is based on character level, and I basically doubled the per level scaling on that, plus bump level 1 healing by 10. This does mean he has a 110 point button press, which is very strong, but it's also single target. It can't help him wave clear. It costs him mana. It's probably okay. I could lower the mana cost here. There's other things we could do, but ultimately, hoping that Q feels a bit better to use and a bit better to max there as well. AP ratio buffs on the W and Q are simply because AP is just not a good enough build on Rakan. I think Rakan is a cool character when he can choose between building tanky and building ability power. I do think actually he should have offensive outlets on his AP. I think if AP gives him tankiness, it makes the builds do the same things. Of course, the difficulty is that Rakan's kit is very reliable. If he Rs and then flash Ws, his entire kit will land, and with no counterplay, he just dumps his AP ratios on you, and he might one-shot you. And this could be a problem if you know, Pyke mid just becomes Talon and just goes, yeah, I pressed R and you just died. You just died to me. Flash away or you die to my full AP combo. So there is some risk on his AP ratios being too high. 0.9 on Q plus 0.8 on W is 1.7. I think his R is 0.5. So it's a 2.2 total AP ratio, and there's a world where it's like, oh yeah, and also I build Lichbane Night Harvester or Rocket Belt Lichbane, and it's like, oh, you just die. So there is some risk there of it actually being super degenerate for AP Rakan to be good. There's certainly a risk there. We might need to nerf him back down afterwards and say, just kidding, you're not allowed to be ratios. You can't have nice things. You're too good of a solo laner. Hoping that's not true. Just saying that that is certainly on my mind. But again, I'm not expecting Rakan to lead the charge. I think he's overall doing mostly fine as it is in solo queue. But letting his off build look a little bit better and look, letting a different skill order maybe be good might be enough for people to look at him and say, actually, yeah, WQ Rakan is enough threat that we can actually play this mid game out. We'll see. Then finally, Thresh. I really think Thresh is the kind of champion that should be able to live in League of Legends at all times. I think he's one of the coolest support kits we've ever put out, and I think should be, you know, just 10% presence in pro play at all times. Yeah, if we have really boring metagames where it's Thresh every single time, that can feel boring, but like, I'd rather see 100% presence Thresh than 100% presence Karma, right? And I think you would too in most cases, so I'm happy to be pretty bullish on Thresh and make him good. Now, a couple of things to note is that Thresh is currently high MMR skewed. By buffing soul stacks, I expect this to be a low MMR skewed buff. I want to point out that this buff of an extra 0.25 armor and AP per stack is pretty equal to the amount of extra armor that other champions got in the durability update. That, as a pretty rough rule of thumb, champions got about 25% more armor scaling. And so giving Thresh 25% more armor scaling seems reasonable to do. But while we're here, yep, he's going to get the ability power as well, and we're going to go ahead and change his damage output. The thing with Thresh is he has a really uncool optimal build, and it's maxing W as soon as possible and maxing E as soon as possible. You're actually meant to keep Descent as a 1-point wonder. I think that is the least cool version of Thresh, and so I'm trying to work to unwind that and make maxing Q better. There's a version of this change list where Dark Passage was a flat 21. There's a version of Flay that was 13 to 11. But ultimately, like, let's lower the cooldown incentive on maxing Flay. Let's lower the cooldown incentive on maxing W. Let's increase the incentive on maxing Q by increasing the damage per rank up. And because Q has an aggressive cooldown rank up of 2 seconds per rank, buffing the functional flat damage of the ability via AP ratio and soul should be a pretty big deal there as well. People mostly do Q max, but it's not actually correct to do so. I would like that to be more correct, to be more likely the optimal build. And we can probably do more to pull that apart down the line. You can lower W's shield rank up and let it just scale off souls overall, leave the 1 second cooldown rank up. There's a bunch of things we could do, but for now, it's this. And ultimately, I want to make sure that we aren't underselling how valuable this is. So consider a world where Thresh has 100 souls. Well, the 100 souls, you get 100 ability power, and he would add 50 damage to his Q, right? If we change that to 125 ability power, 125 ability power times 0.75 is like 187. So in a late game death sentence, It's a pretty substantial increase in the amount of damage gained here from plus 50 to plus 87. Is I believe the math, unless I'm hard trolling, which I might be to be fair, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. Pretty sure I'm right. Pretty sure we go from 50 bonus damage to 87 bonus damage. I could have done the math itself, and I just didn't, but let's just move on and pretend that I know what I'm talking about. E's AP ratio similarly increased by 50%, which means the amount of damage you're going to get from getting more AP per soul and a bigger AP ratio is going to be a similar, like 80-ish percent the damage increase, 87% damage increase, I believe is the actual math there, of how much damage souls are giving to you. In general, these abilities just deserved better AP ratios overall. Because of the fact that AP as a stat is a troll build on Thresh, I don't expect it to be good. I'm not expecting Demonic Embrace Thresh. I'm not expecting Night Harvester Thresh. I'm not expecting Riftmaker Thresh. I'm not expecting Deathcap to show up in his build or anything. And I'm not expecting it to be remotely good. But just sort of making good on AP ratios aren't fake, I think is a good thing for the game. And so those are the changes to supports. Again, a lot of aggressive supports trying to lead the charge. Nautilus is probably going to be the one to actually break the ice. And hopefully a lot of things in the ecosystem can come up around them. There are no buffs to Leona. She is currently already pretty performant for most players in solo queue. She actually got buffs post-durability update. And a lot of her good matchups are into these kinds of champions that we're already going to see, or potentially going to see. And so I didn't think it was correct to further buff Leona. All right, a new topic going on. Because Radiant Virtue is getting changes. We're going to scroll up very slightly here. We're gonna do some line breaks so we can get Thresh off the screen. I'm making changes to Radiant Virtue in 13.3. Radiant Virtue is underpurchased for how good it is for regular players. Now, to some degree, this can't be helped because the design intent of Radiant Virtue is a selfless tank item, a team-oriented tank item. Now, this is essentially a cursed problem because team-oriented champions will almost always do better in pro play. I should say team-oriented items will always do better in pro play because pros will try harder to do what wins the game and care less about individual coolness. This is why Sejuani is like a first pickable jungler in pro play right now, and we don't see her in solo queue almost at all. It's why we see Radiant Virtue a lot more in pro play builds. Radiant Virtue Vi, Radiant Virtue Maokai. Right, like when we see Maokai in pro play, it's Radiant Virtue, not Leandries for the most part. They're both good. They're of similar power level, but solo queue is Leandries and pro plays Radiant Virtue, right? Because they're trying to win the game and they know it's the right item to buy. Now, I think there is some level of a satisfaction loss in the item. But ultimately, still, we know it's going to be a bit pro-skewed as an item. We know it's not going to be as popular as Jack Show. But I'm hoping I can move the needle a bit in moving it out of support's hands into tank's hands. Because right now, in solo queue, its top 3 purchasers were number 1, Zac. Okay, that's not going to go anywhere. Number 2 is Bard, and number 3 was Karma. But the thing is, supports and enchanters already have defensive items. They've already got Locket. They've already got Moonstone Renewer. They've got side grades like Mandate. They've got side grades like Shirelia's. They've got a very healthy ecosystem of items. Tank supports do not have, or tank, and then tank supports have even more because they can go Locket. They can go Shirelia's. They can go even Shroud. Like, those tools exist there as well. They don't necessarily need Radiant Virtue. If they get a bunch of money, they can buy it, I suppose, but they don't need it. But tank farm champions do not have a lot of options, right? Their mythics are Iceborne Gauntlet, Jack Show, and Radiant Virtue here. I think there's a 4th, and I'm just like blanking on it, but it doesn't matter. Pretend, whatever. Either way, they don't have all that many options. So I want to keep Radiant Virtue in the hands of income tanks, which means not making it cheaper. In fact, I might make it more expensive. I might eventually make this 30 gold to further keep it out of the hands of supports who don't earn gold income. For now, I don't think it's needed. But I essentially want to make the item more appreciable and more pronounced in what it does and try to skew it away from supports. So going on to PvE, next time the build comes off, are these changes. The cooldown is being increased to 90 seconds because it's just a generic nerf. This actually puts it a little bit out of Karma's hands, where Karma is abusing low ulti cooldowns to just like, it's up, bam, hit it again. 90 seconds helps deal with that. I am making the item substantially more selfish and substantially more skewed towards your own health by bumping the amount of health you get when you pop the item, and actually heavily increasing the amount of healing the item gives itself. Now, Radiant Virtue is definitely the healing item, not the healing item that also happens to give people ability haste. This also makes it less selfish, interestingly, in some cases, because someone like Zac can ult at the start of the fight. Once his ult is over, he's still got Radiant Virtue on for a while, and he's got lower cooldowns on W, lower cooldowns on Q, all that kind of fun stuff. Plus giving his entire team 20 more ability haste on non-ultis, and that does a lot for them as well. So we rip out the ability haste aura, and you rip out the healing amp, where people were getting up to double the amount of healing if they were low on health. I think low health healing amps, though it does increase the some sort of variety on the item, it'll feel a bit different. The amount of healing can kind of move around a bit more. It can kind of feel more engaging in that way. I think it does a really, really bad job for selling coolness, because I think players have a hard time keeping an entire tooltip in their mind. League is a very complex game with like well over 100 champions. There's a ton of items. There's a lot of ability interactions. There's, just a lot going on, and it's hard to keep every single detail in your head. So the more I can simplify an item while still making what it does pronounced, I think that is generally a better thing to make the item stick out and be obvious to players what it does. There's also an interesting thing, which is how the item actually works itself. And it's always worked this way, but the way the item works currently on live is you pop it, you get 10% max health, and it heals you instantly. You get that 2% max health instantly. And then 3 seconds later, it heals you for 2% max health. 3 seconds later, it heals you for 2% max health. 3 seconds later, it heals you for 2% max health. Congratulations, 8% max health total, which means the pop is 12% max health, and then 6 over the course of 9 seconds. This is getting changed to 3 pops total. It pops when you pop the active, so you're getting 20% on activation instead of 12. And of course, like, the new max health actually filters in, so it's a bit more than that, but whatever, gonna round down. And then a pop for 5, and then a pop for 5 when the item ends. So I'm hoping that the heal is chunkier and more feelable, and certainly it is higher total, to be clear as well, unless you were really, really low on health, in which case that if you're at like 20% HP, it's actually kind of the same healing instead of it being more healing. But I'm hoping the heals are chunkier, and the active feels really good of like, oh wow, I jumped up by 20% max health by gaining 15 and healing for 5. That should, I think, be really, really felt. And again, the ability haste aura is gone. Now, this, I am not convinced is a very, very large nerf. Obviously, the max health I gain is higher. The amount of healing I gain is higher. The amount of healing I get my teammates is higher. But the ability haste aura really, really, really matters. And also, this is not twice as good. The thing is, it looks twice as good on this tooltip, but it's not twice as good because if you were at full health, you're dealing with 0 anyway. And if you weren't full health, you were getting amplification, which means this was never ever an 8% max health heal. It was a 10 or 11 or 12 or 13% max health heal. Well, that's 15. So I barely changed these numbers. And I cut the haste aura, I nerfed the cooldown, and I gave it a bit more max health. So it's not really that buffed, but the tooltip looks really buffed, right? And that's the goal, right? And that's what you get by paring down mechanics, is you can make the mechanics that still remain look a lot better, and it might not be that much better. So this is what is shipping on a PvE next time a build kicks off. There are 2 more changes, though, that I want to do that, as I am learning the tools, I have not been able to yet implement because, again, I am very, very new to the scripting stuff that League of Legends has, and so I'm figuring it out. But 2 things I want to add are changing it from upon ulti to manual activation. This will actually make the cooldown change a lot easier to stomach because you have a lot more control over it. This will change its users quite a lot. I think this is a very good thing for the item overall to have it manual activation. Because especially of the new thing that I'm adding. We put not implemented twice here. I guess we'll delete one of the lines. But ultimately, what's happening is, look. The optimal use case for this item is probably to pop it early. Once you have lost 30% of your max health, if you're at 70%, none of your healing will go to waste. So you can pop this and reliably guarantee that you're going to stay healthy and your teammates are going to be topped off as well. It is very, very common for an engaged tank to be not the first one dead. Shocking, I know. It's very common to not be the first one dead, which means If you wait for failsafe to pop this item, you will have failed to heal teammates who needed it in the team fight. But the failsafe is if you get dropped very, very low, lower than lifeline, which is debatable, but I'm going to try it at lower than lifeline by a meaningful degree, it will pop on its own. This means you might have been caught out and would have died anyway, and it goes on cooldown and you have nothing to say about it, and I think that's fine. Yep, much like Guardian Angel, if you got cut out and you lose the item, you lose the item. It's on cooldown for a minute and a half, too bad for you. Such is life. But hey, look, players can often be really, really bad at using actives correctly, so here you go. It's going to pop for you, but it's going to pop for you at an inopportune time. This will pop when you are about to die, and you probably should have done it much sooner. There's even a decent chance you will die before the last healing ticks come off. Then you're going to miss out on a bunch of health. I'm okay with the item popping automated for you, worse than what you're doing, because ultimately what it comes down to is I think telling players, hey, you should get good is fine, right? League of Legends is a game about getting better, about mastering the game and the tools at your disposal and improving as a League of Legends player. This does not remove that because there are better times to pop this than at 50%. Now, if the heal was missing health based, if it popped you a shield and then started healing you based on missing health, if Tryndamere ult was automated, those would all lower skill expression in the game. But it does not heal you based on missing health. The heal is flat. The heal is meant for your teammates who have already died. If this pops, it's because you screwed up and should have cast this earlier. So you're getting a bad version of the item if you aren't going to have to use the item, but at least you get to use the item. I think this is a hugely positive thing for the design of the item overall and a good thing for the game. And I would actually like to see if we can find more ways to make items kind of work like this, where you forgot to use it, but we'll do it for you, even if at a worse time. I think that is, generally speaking, going to be a bit of a positive. Maybe that's a weird thought, but it's kind of how I feel about it. I think it's actually pretty reasonable. Just like, I don't know, there's thoughts out there. Anyway, this ended up being a relatively long video because there were two separate things to talk about here. But let me know, please. I want your feedback. Let me know what you think it takes to get a more exciting metagame over in pro play. I think it'll be cool, but let me know. Thanks, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye.